You keep losing negotiations before you even open your mouth. And the worst part is you don't know it's happening. You walk into the room feeling prepared. You've done your research. You know your numbers. You sit down, you smile, you wait for the other person to speak first because someone once told you that letting them talk first gives you information. And the moment they say a number, the game is over. You just don't know it yet. Because that number, whatever it is, has just become the gravitational center of every thought you will have for the rest of the conversation. You will negotiate around it. You will push against it. You will feel like you're fighting hard. But you are fighting inside a cage they built in the first 10 seconds, and you helped them build it by staying silent. Here is the truth that will reframe every interaction you have from this moment forward. Whoever sets the anchor controls everything. The first number spoken in a negotiation doesn't just influence the conversation. It creates the universe the conversation happens in. It defines what expensive looks like, what reasonable looks like, what cheap looks like. And here is what makes this so dangerous: it works even when the number is absurd. Even when the number is obviously a strategic move. Even when you consciously recognize what they're doing. Your mind still grabs onto it and starts there. And it never adjusts far enough. This is not a minor influence. This is the single most powerful cognitive mechanism in human decision-making, and it operates below your awareness like a current beneath the surface of a river. You think you're swimming straight. You're actually being pulled. Machiavelli understood something about power that most people still refuse to accept. Power is not about force. It's not about who speaks loudest or who has the strongest argument. Power is about position. It's about who moves first, who sets the terms, who creates the frame that everyone else must operate within. The prince who lets someone else define the battlefield has already lost the war, no matter how brilliant his tactics are within it. And you have been letting other people define your battlefields your entire life. Think about what this pattern is quietly costing you. It's costing you money, because you accept offers that are anchored lower than what you deserve and you feel like you won something. It's costing you respect, because you operate within frames that position you as the one who should be grateful. It's costing you freedom, because you think you're choosing when you're really just selecting from options someone else dealt you. And it's costing you something even deeper, the quiet, bone-level sense that you are the author of your own outcomes. You're not the author. You're a character in someone else's script, and the anchor is the pen they used to write you in. Every salary negotiation where they mentioned a number first. Every relationship argument where they defined the issue before you could. Every business deal where their opening offer set the range. Every time you walked away feeling like you got a deal, ask yourself, a deal compared to what? Compared to their anchor. Not compared to what you actually wanted. Not compared to what you deserved. Compared to the number they planted in your head before you even started thinking. Most people think negotiation happens at the table. Strategic people know negotiation is already over before anyone sits down. The anchor was set in the email that mentioned a number. In the reputation that preceded you. In the first impression that established your value range. In the silence where you failed to speak first. By the time the conversation starts, the game is mostly done. Here are 7 dark principles for planting the anchor in every interaction, so they operate within the boundaries you set, not the ones they choose. 1. Always be the first to put a number on the table. There is a myth in negotiation, and it has cost you more than you know. The myth says never speak first. Let the other person reveal their hand. Let them show you where they stand before you commit to a position. This is advice from people who understand poker but not psychology. In poker, information is hidden and speaking first reveals something. In negotiation, the first number doesn't reveal anything. It creates something. It creates the reference point that every subsequent number will be judged against. And here is what's remarkable. Even when people know the first number is ridiculous, even when they consciously recognize it as a strategic move, their mind still uses it as the starting point. They adjust from it. And adjustment is always insufficient. Always. This is not a flaw in some people. This is how every human mind works, including yours. You are not immune. No one is immune. Awareness of the anchor does not free you from the anchor. It just makes you a person who knows exactly why they're being controlled while they're being controlled. Think about what happens when you see a house listed at $500,000 and it sells for $450,000. You think the buyer got a deal. But what if the house was worth $350,000? The anchor did its job. $450,000 felt like a victory when it was a loss. The seller understood something the buyer didn't. The first number isn't a starting position to be negotiated down from. It's a psychological cage that limits the range of what feels reasonable. When you let someone else put the first number on the table, you are stepping into their cage. You are letting them define what expensive looks like, what reasonable looks like, what cheap looks like. And then you negotiate within that universe, completely unaware that the universe itself was constructed to serve them. You think you're fighting for a better deal. You're fighting for a slightly better position inside their frame. That's not the same thing. The strategic move is simple, but it feels uncomfortable because it requires you to commit before you have full information. You open with a number that is aggressive but defensible. Not absurd. Absurd triggers rejection and activates their defenses because it feels like an insult. Aggressive but anchored in some version of reality. This does two things simultaneously. First, it sets the ceiling or the floor, depending on which direction you're negotiating. Second, and more importantly, it forces the other person to respond to your frame rather than build their own. They are now reacting. They are now adjusting from your position. And they will never adjust far enough to get back to where they would have been if they'd spoken first. This feels risky because you're committing without knowing their number. But here is the reframe. By speaking first, you are not guessing their number. You are eliminating it. Their number, whatever it was, now has to justify itself against yours. You've taken their weapon and turned it into a response. You've made them a player in your game instead of making yourself a player in theirs. 2. Make them respond to your frame, not the reverse. The anchor is not just a number. The number is the visible part. Beneath it is the frame, and the frame is where the real power lives. Because the frame determines what numbers are even thinkable. It defines the universe of possibility. And whoever defines that universe controls everything that happens inside it. If you walk into a conversation about a job offer and the employer says, "We typically offer somewhere between 60 and 70 for this role," they haven't just anchored you to a number. They've framed the entire conversation as one where 60 to 70 is reality. Everything above that is a stretch. Everything below it is a concession. You can negotiate within that range, but you've already accepted the range. You've already lost the bigger game, and the 5 or 10% you fight for feels like a win when it's crumbs from a table you should have been building. Most people accept frames without questioning them. They hear a range and start thinking about how to get to the top of it. Strategic people set frames before the conversation even begins. They don't negotiate within the other person's universe. They create a different universe and pull the other person into it. If you're negotiating salary, you don't wait for them to name a range. You introduce a frame before they get the chance. Based on the scope of this role, the level of impact I'm expected to deliver, and what the market rewards for that combination, I'm looking at positions in the 120 to 150 range. You haven't just named a number. You've reframed the entire conversation. Now 60 to 70 isn't the universe. It's an insult. You've made them adjust from your anchor, and you've made their original frame look small. They now have to justify why their range is appropriate against your frame, not the other way around. This works in every domain of life, not just money. In a relationship argument, the person who frames the issue first usually wins. If your partner says, "You never make time for me," the conversation is now about your failure. Every response you give is a defense. Every excuse is a confirmation. You are inside their frame, and the best you can do is mitigate damage. But if you speak first and say, "I've been feeling like we're both stretched thin and I want to talk about how we're prioritizing each other," the conversation is now about a shared problem. Same situation. Completely different frame. Completely different emotional trajectory. Completely different outcome. The person who sets the frame controls the emotional architecture of the entire conversation. They determine what the conversation is about, what it is not about, what counts as relevant, and what gets dismissed as beside the point. Everyone else is playing inside a structure they didn't build and can't see. Baltasar Gracian, a thinker who understood power the way Machiavelli did, recognized that the first to establish a position forces everyone else to respond to it. This is not a small advantage. This is the advantage from which all other advantages flow. When you set the frame, you've already determined the range of acceptable outcomes. You've already narrowed the field of what's possible. The other person thinks they're negotiating. They're actually just selecting from the options your frame has made available. 3. Use contrast to make your real ask feel like a relief. The mind does not evaluate things in isolation. It never has. It evaluates everything relative to what came before. This is one of the most exploitable features of human psychology, and it is being used against you every single day, in every store you walk into, in every conversation you have, in every deal you make. And you don't even notice. You've experienced this 1,000 times. The suit jacket costs $1,200. The salesperson suggests a tie to go with it. The tie costs $150. After spending $1,200, $150 feels like nothing. It feels like a rounding error. But if you had walked into the store to buy just a tie, $150 would feel expensive. You'd hesitate. You'd think about it. The contrast principle made the tie feel cheap by putting it next to something expensive. The anchor wasn't the tie. The anchor was the suit. And the tie was positioned to feel like a relief. This is not a trick used by dishonest people. This is a principle used by everyone who understands how perception works. Salespeople use it. Real estate agents use it. Employers use it. Your partner uses it. Your friends use it. The only question is whether you understand it well enough to use it deliberately or whether you'll continue being used by it unconsciously. In negotiation, this means you never lead with your real position. Never. Your real position is the tie. You need a suit first. You lead with something more aggressive, something that makes your actual ask feel like a reasonable compromise. You let them push back. You let them feel like they've fought hard. And then you concede to the position you wanted from the beginning. They feel like they won something. You got exactly what you planned to get. The concession was theatrical. The outcome was predetermined. And they will tell everyone they know about the great deal they negotiated, completely unaware that they performed exactly as you expected them to. This works in social situations too. If you need a favor that requires moderate effort, first ask for something that requires significant effort. When they say no, and they will say no because the ask is too big, your real request now feels like a reasonable compromise. They feel relief that you're not asking for the big thing anymore. They say yes to the smaller favor eagerly, feeling like they've dodged a bullet. You feel satisfied because you got what you wanted. Everyone walks away feeling like they won. But you were the architect of the entire interaction. This feels dark to some people. It feels manipulative. And here is the uncomfortable truth that Marcus Aurelius would have you face. All negotiation is manipulation. All conversation is influence. The only question is whether you're doing it with awareness or having it done to you in ignorance. Complaining about the nature of the game is what the powerless do. Learning the game and mastering it is what the powerful do. You don't have the luxury of pretending the game doesn't exist. The game exists whether you play it or not. The only question is whether you play it well. 4. Get them to say no before you go for yes. Here is something that sounds completely backwards but is one of the most important truths about influence you will ever learn. A premature yes is more dangerous than a no. Far more dangerous. Because a premature yes is not agreement. It is escape. It is the other person finding the fastest exit from an uncomfortable conversation. They say yes to end the interaction, not to commit to the outcome. And the moment the pressure lifts, the moment they are alone, the moment they have time to think, that yes dissolves. They reverse it. They ghost you. They find reasons why it won't work. They were never with you. They were just trying to leave. A no, on the other hand, is a gift. When someone says no, they have drawn a line. They have told you where their boundaries are. They have defined the space. And now you know exactly what you're working with. A no creates safety because it gives the other person the feeling of control. They said no. They pushed back. They asserted themselves. And now that they feel in control, their defenses come down. They stop being tense. They stop being guarded. They open up. And real negotiation can begin. The strategic move is to design your opening so that it invites a no. Not a no that kills the deal. A no that makes them feel powerful and safe. You ask a question where no is the comfortable answer, and their no gives you the opening you need. Is it a ridiculous idea to propose we revisit the compensation structure? No, it's not ridiculous. Would it be impossible to move the timeline up by 2 weeks? No, it's not impossible. You have given them the satisfaction of rejecting your framing, and now they are in a position to engage with the substance. They said no, so they feel in control. But you designed the question, so you are in control. This is the illusion of control in its purest and most powerful form. You are not surrendering power by letting them say no. You are directing their attention. You are steering the conversation by giving them the feeling of steering it. The best negotiators do not dominate the conversation. They shape it so thoroughly that the other person walks away believing they drove the outcome. The other person feels like the winner. You get what you wanted. This is not a contradiction. This is mastery at its highest level. Most people chase yes because yes feels like progress. Yes feels like validation. Yes feels like you're getting somewhere. Strategic people chase no because no creates the conditions for real progress. The yes you get after a no is worth 10 times the yes you get without one. The first is commitment. The second is compliance. Commitment holds under pressure. Compliance collapses the moment pressure shifts. If you want agreements that last, you need commitment. And commitment only comes from someone who feels like they had the power to say no and chose yes freely. 5. Control the options so every choice serves you. The most powerful form of control is the kind that feels like freedom. When people believe they chose freely, they never question the choice. They defend it. They commit to it. They take ownership of it. They will argue with anyone who suggests they made the wrong decision, because attacking their choice now feels like attacking their autonomy. And if every available option leads to an outcome you designed, then their freedom is your instrument. Their autonomy is your weapon. They are choosing, and they are choosing exactly what you wanted them to choose, and they will fight to the death to defend that choice because it was theirs. This is not about giving people one path and calling it a choice. That is too obvious. Obvious manipulation breeds resentment. People are not stupid. They can feel when they're being cornered. The art is in giving people genuinely different paths that all converge on your destination. 3 options, each with different trade-offs, each acceptable to you. They pick one. They feel empowered. You get an outcome you would have accepted from any of the 3. The difference is that they feel ownership. They feel like they negotiated. They feel like they won. In a salary negotiation, you might present 3 packages. One with higher base salary but smaller bonus potential. One with lower base but significant equity. One with moderate base but exceptional flexibility and conditions. All 3 are within your acceptable range. The candidate picks the one that feels best to them, and they walk away believing they negotiated brilliantly. You walk away with a deal you would have accepted from the start. But they chose it. They own it. They will fight to defend it. And if things go wrong, they will blame themselves for the choice rather than blaming you for the options, because people blame themselves for their own decisions far more harshly than they blame others for decisions imposed on them. This works because of a deep and uncomfortable truth about human psychology. People don't resist outcomes. They resist the feeling of not being in control of outcomes. Give them control of the selection process, and they will accept outcomes they would have rejected if those same outcomes had been presented as the only option. The outcome is identical. The feeling is opposite. And people respond to feeling, not to facts. This is why framing is more powerful than logic, why presentation is more powerful than substance, and why the person who controls the options controls everything regardless of what the other person thinks they're choosing. Machiavelli understood this at a level that most people still haven't grasped. The prince who forces his will directly breeds rebellion. People resist what is imposed. They resent what is dictated. They fight what is forced. But the prince who creates conditions where people choose what he wanted all along breeds loyalty. They defend what they chose. They own what they selected. They commit to what they believe was their idea. The first approach is tyranny. The second is power. Tyranny is exhausting because it requires constant force and constant vigilance. Power is sustainable because it operates through the willing participation of the people it governs. You do not want to be a tyrant in your interactions. You want to be the person whose frame is so well constructed that everyone inside it believes they are free. 6. Validate them before you anchor them. Here is a mistake that ruins more negotiations than any other single error. People try to anchor before they have lowered the other person's defenses. They walk in, they state their number, they make their case, and they wonder why the other person rejects it reflexively without even considering it. They think the anchor failed. The anchor didn't fail. The sequencing failed. You can't plant a seed in frozen ground. You have to thaw the soil first. Before you set your anchor, you must first make the other person feel seen. This does not mean flattery. Flattery is obvious and it triggers suspicion. People can feel when you're buttering them up. It makes them more defensive, not less. Validation is something completely different. Validation means accurately reflecting back to the other person what they believe about themselves, their situation, and their position. Not agreeing with them. Not conceding to them. Reflecting their reality back to them so precisely that they feel understood. When you do this, something remarkable happens. Their walls come down. Not because you tricked them. Because you demonstrated that you understand the landscape they're operating in. And people trust people who understand the landscape. People lower their guard for people who can see what they see, even if those people want something different. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot of responsibility without the recognition that matches it. If that is true, you have just made them feel understood at a level that most people never experience. And now they are open. Now you can introduce your frame, your anchor, your terms, and they will consider them instead of rejecting them on reflex. The validation created the opening. The anchor fills it. Most people think influence starts with the ask. Strategic people know influence starts with the acknowledgement. You validate first, anchor second. Skip the validation and your anchor bounces off their armor like a stone off a wall. Include the validation and your anchor drops into open ground and takes root. The same words in a different order produce completely different results. The anchor is the same. The frame is the same. The only variable is sequence. And the person who controls the sequence controls the outcome. This is why the most dangerous people in any room are not the loudest. They are not the most aggressive. They are the ones who listen first, reflect what they hear, and then quietly introduce the frame that everyone else will spend the rest of the conversation adjusting from. They don't dominate. They position. They don't force. They sequence. And by the time everyone realizes what happened, the anchor is already set and every thought in the room is orbiting it. 7. Make them come to you. There is a principle of power so fundamental that it underlies every other technique I have shared with you. The person who moves toward the other loses the positional advantage. Not the person who speaks first. The person who physically or emotionally leans in. When you go to someone, you signal need. When they come to you, you signal value. This is not rational. It is not fair. It is not logical. But it is deeply, permanently wired into how humans read social dynamics, and it governs every interaction you will ever have. In every interaction, there is a gravitational pull. Someone is always leaning in more than the other. Someone is always pursuing. Someone is always waiting. The person who is pursued has the power. The person who pursues has given it away. This applies to negotiations, to relationships, to business deals, to job searches, to every single interaction where two parties want something from each other. The one who needs it less always wins. And the one who moves toward the other always needs it more, at least in perception, and perception is all that matters. The strategic move is to create conditions where they come to you. Not by being passive. Not by playing hard to get in some childish way. By being positioned. You plant your anchor. You set your frame. And then you wait. You do not chase. You do not follow up excessively. You do not signal urgency. You do not send the email that says just checking in. You let the anchor do its work in silence. And when they come, and they will come if your anchor was well placed and your frame was well constructed, they come into your space. On your terms. Responding to your position. Already adjusting from your number before they say a word. This requires a kind of inner strength that most people do not possess. It requires the Stoic's composure. The ability to sit with discomfort. To tolerate the silence. To resist the urgent, almost physical need to fill the space with movement, with words, with action. Most people break the silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. They send the follow-up text. They make the second call. They offer a concession to keep the conversation moving. Strategic people use silence because silence makes others uncomfortable. When you plant an anchor and then go quiet, the other person starts negotiating with themselves. They start adjusting from your number without you having to say another word. They talk themselves closer to your position while you sit and listen. Every word they speak is an adjustment from your anchor. Every sentence is a concession they do not realize they are making. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this quality. The ability to remain unmoved while the world moves around you. The capacity to be the still point in a turning world. He understood that the person who can wait without anxiety has an almost insurmountable advantage over the person who must act to relieve their own tension. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power in its purest form, because it forces the other person to fill the void, and everything they fill it with is an adjustment from your position. You don't need to push. You just need to not pull. You need to hold your ground and let the anchor do what anchors do. Hold. Let me bring this together, because here is what you need to understand at the deepest level, not just intellectually but in your bones. Every interaction is a negotiation. Every negotiation has an anchor. And whoever sets the anchor controls everything. Not because they are smarter. Not because they are more powerful. Not because they have the stronger argument or the more charming personality. But because they understood one thing that the other person didn't. The first frame, the first number, the first reference point doesn't just start the conversation. It defines the universe the conversation happens in. And once you're inside someone else's universe, every move you make is a move they anticipated. You have been walking into other people's universes your entire life. You have been negotiating inside frames other people built. You have been adjusting from anchors other people planted. And you have been calling it free will. You have been calling it choice. You have been calling it your decision. It wasn't. It was insufficient adjustment from someone else's starting position. And every single time you did that, you lost something. Money. Respect. Time. Power. Leverage. The quiet, bone-level sense that you are the author of your own outcomes. You were not the author. You were a reader of someone else's book, and the anchor was the first sentence they wrote. That ends now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when you have practiced enough or read enough or prepared enough. Right now. The next conversation you walk into, you set the anchor. The next negotiation, you plant the first number. The next argument, you define the frame before they can. The next time someone tries to put a number in your head, you recognize it for what it is. A cage. And you refuse to step inside it. You build your own cage and you make them step inside yours. This is the ruthless art Machiavelli perfected. The art of setting the terms so completely, so invisibly, that everyone else believes they are choosing freely within them. The anchor is the quietest instrument of power ever devised. It does not look like power. It does not sound like power. It does not feel like power to the person it is being used on. It simply reshapes the terrain of every interaction so subtly that no one notices until the outcome has already been determined. By the time they realize what happened, you have already won. Not because you fought harder. Because you moved first. Because you set the frame. Because you planted the number that every subsequent thought would orbit around. And here is the bookend to everything I have told you. Whoever sets the anchor controls everything. Not the loudest voice. Not the strongest argument. Not the most charming personality. Not the person with the most information. The person who plants the first number, the first frame, the first reference point. That person controls the gravitational center of the entire conversation. Everyone else is orbiting. Everyone else is adjusting. Everyone else is negotiating inside a universe they did not build and cannot see. Be the center. Be the anchor. Be the person who defines the universe everyone else negotiates within. Be the one who moves first, who sets the terms, who creates the frame, and then has the composure to go silent and let the anchor hold. Machiavelli gave us the blueprint. The anchor is the instrument. The composure is the discipline. The power is yours. Type the words, "I am untouchable," in the comments right now. Not because the words themselves have power, but because the act of declaring it, publicly, deliberately, without apology, is itself an anchor. You are setting the frame for who you are becoming. You are planting the first number. And from this moment forward, every negotiation, every conversation, every interaction operates within the boundaries you set. Right now. Not tomorrow. Right now.